Chosen One. The story opens at a moment when something deeply unsettling finally begins to reveal itself in the open. For a long time, you carried a quiet awareness that something was wrong, something that others around you either could not see or refused to acknowledge. Small events that seemed disconnected to everyone else formed a pattern in your mind. Words that sounded harmless to others carried a different tone when you listened carefully. Situations that appeared ordinary on the surface felt heavy with meaning when you looked beneath them. You sensed that a certain scenario was slowly unfolding, and you spoke about it cautiously, hoping others might recognize what you were seeing before the situation grew worse. Yet your concerns were rarely received the way you hoped. Many people dismissed your warnings with quick explanations that made your perceptions seem unnecessary or exaggerated. Some told you that you were overthinking things, that the situation was harmless, or that you were reading too much meaning into small details. Others suggested that your awareness came from insecurity, jealousy, or emotional sensitivity rather than genuine insight. Each time you tried to explain what you sensed, the response you received made you appear increasingly isolated, as though the problem existed not in the situation itself, but in your perception of it. Chosen One. Those moments were some of the loneliest stages of your journey. Standing alone with a truth that others refuse to see requires a level of courage most people never develop. It forces you to question your own understanding, while simultaneously holding on to the quiet conviction inside your spirit. You wondered whether you were mistaken. You wondered whether the people around you were right and your instincts were wrong. Yet beneath those doubts, there remained a deeper voice, one that refused to disappear no matter how often others tried to silence it. Heaven now reveals that voice was not fear, it was discernment. What made you different from the people around you was not anxiety or suspicion, but perception, sharpened through spiritual sensitivity. While others evaluated each incident as an isolated event, you saw connections forming between them. Where others saw coincidence, you recognized a pattern. Where others saw nothing unusual, you felt the presence of something developing beneath the surface. Chosen One. The ability to perceive patterns where others see fragments is often misunderstood. People who rely only on surface information rarely recognize deeper signals until the consequences become impossible to ignore. Your spirit, however, was already being trained to see beyond appearances. God had been sharpening your sight through experience, teaching you how to recognize subtle warnings that many people overlook until it is too late. This story, therefore, begins in the quiet place where truth often stands alone. It begins with a chosen soul holding on to what God revealed, even when the world around them called it exaggeration. It begins with a person willing to endure misunderstanding rather than abandon discernment. The season of loneliness was never meant to last forever, and the moment has now arrived when the truth you carried quietly is finally stepping into the light. Chosen One. The first signs appeared quietly, almost invisibly, in ways that were easy for others to overlook, but impossible for your spirit to ignore. Nothing dramatic announced itself at the beginning. There were no loud confrontations or obvious acts that could easily be pointed to as proof of something wrong. Instead, it began through small moments that seemed ordinary on the surface, yet carried a subtle unease beneath them. You noticed that a certain person seemed to appear repeatedly in places connected to your words, your ideas, and the insights you shared. At first, it felt like coincidence, the kind of overlap that naturally happens when people move within the same circles. Yet the more time passed, the more the pattern became difficult to dismiss. This individual began echoing your thoughts in ways that felt strangely precise. Ideas you had expressed privately or shared within small conversations began appearing again in different settings, sometimes presented as though they originated elsewhere. Words you had spoken in reflection surfaced again through their voice, slightly altered, but unmistakably familiar. Experiences that belonged to your journey appeared reflected back through their narratives, as though pieces of your life had been quietly studied and reproduced. Each moment alone might have seemed harmless, but together they formed a pattern that carried a different energy. Chosen one, the important detail in those early moments was your response. You did not react immediately with anger or jealousy. Your spirit did not interpret the situation as competition or ego-driven imitation. Instead, you watched. Something within you felt unsettled, not because someone else was sharing similar ideas, but because the repetition felt intentional rather than natural. There was a sense that the person was not simply inspired by what they heard, but was observing you carefully, studying your expressions, your perspective, and the way your insights carried meaning. That observation created a quiet alertness in your mind. You began paying closer attention to the interactions that occurred when this person was nearby. Sometimes they seemed unusually attentive when you spoke, listening with an intensity that went beyond ordinary curiosity. Other times, they appeared shortly after you had shared something meaningful, as if they were positioning themselves in places where they could gather information about your thoughts. It was not always obvious, and it rarely happened in ways that others would immediately recognize as unusual. Yet the repetition of those moments created a feeling that something deliberate was unfolding beneath the surface. Chosen one. Another layer of awareness began forming alongside these observations. You noticed that the person's energy changed when they interacted with you directly. In front of others, they appeared perfectly normal, even pleasant. Their tone sounded friendly, and their demeanor suggested nothing unusual. But when your attention focused closely on the interaction, you felt a subtle shift that was difficult to describe. The atmosphere around them carried a quality that felt intrusive, as though their presence was not simply engaging with you, but examining you. This sensation was not easy to explain to anyone else. Energy is something that many people feel instinctively but struggle to articulate. When a person's intentions are clear and honest, their presence often feels open and natural. When motives are hidden or manipulative, the atmosphere around them can carry tension even when their words sound harmless. The shift you sensed did not appear through obvious hostility. Instead, it felt studied, almost analytical, as if the person was quietly gathering pieces of you rather than simply interacting with you. Chosen one. This awareness created a tension within you that grew stronger over time. On one side of your mind, you wanted to believe that nothing was wrong. You preferred to assume good intentions because your nature leaned toward understanding rather than suspicion. On the other side of your spirit, however, the pattern kept repeating in ways that made coincidence less and less likely. Each time your ideas reappeared through this person, each time they seemed to position themselves around your experiences, the sense of deliberate imitation grew stronger. The difficulty of the situation lay in the kind of evidence you were receiving. What you were perceiving was not easily measurable through visible actions alone. It existed in patterns of behavior, shifts in energy, and the quiet intuition that something beneath the surface was not aligned with honesty. These kinds of signals often come through spiritual sensitivity, rather than through obvious facts, and that difference made the situation harder to explain to others. Chosen one. When you tried to describe what you were sensing, people around you often responded with confusion. From their perspective, nothing seemed clearly wrong. The person appeared friendly, polite, and cooperative in social settings. They did not openly challenge you or create visible conflict. Because most people rely on appearances to judge situations, they saw no reason to question the behavior that troubled you. Your concerns, therefore, sounded abstract to them, as though you were reacting to impressions rather than evidence. This reaction created one of the most difficult aspects of the story. You were standing between two realities at the same time. One reality was the visible world that everyone else recognized, where interactions appeared normal and harmless. The other reality existed in the subtle signals your spirit was picking up, signals that suggested imitation and observation were happening intentionally. Holding both realities at once required patience and inner strength, because it meant trusting your perception even when others did not share it. Chosen one. The tension grew stronger as the pattern continued. The more you paid attention, the clearer it became that the person's behavior was not accidental. Their presence seemed to follow your insights. Their language reflected your expressions. Their interpretations of experiences echoed themes that had originally emerged through your own reflections. It felt as though they were constructing something from pieces of your perspective, while presenting it as though it had developed independently. At the same time, the person maintained a public image that made questioning their actions seem unreasonable. They appeared composed and agreeable in front of others. Their behavior in social environments created an impression of normality that protected them from suspicion. Anyone who observed the situation from the outside saw nothing unusual enough to justify concern. This contrast between appearance and perception deepened the isolation you felt. Chosen one, the real challenge was not simply recognizing the pattern, but deciding how to respond to it. Acting too quickly might have created conflict without clear proof. Remaining silent meant carrying the awareness alone. You chose a path of observation, allowing time to reveal whether the pattern would continue or dissolve. That patience became an important part of your discernment because it prevented you from reacting impulsively while still honoring the signals your spirit was receiving. Through that process, your understanding deepened. You began realizing that spiritual perception often works differently from ordinary reasoning. While most people rely on visible evidence to determine truth, discernment frequently begins through intuition and pattern recognition. It allows a person to sense what is forming before it becomes fully visible. This ability does not always provide immediate proof, but it prepares the spirit to recognize danger before it becomes undeniable. Chosen one. This early stage of the story therefore represents the moment when your awareness first awakened to something others had not yet seen. The signs were subtle but persistent. The imitation, the studied attention, and the shifts in energy formed a pattern that your spirit could not ignore. Even though the evidence was difficult to explain, the tension created by those signals marked the beginning of a deeper revelation that would unfold over time. Chosen one. The moment you finally found the courage to speak about what you had been sensing marked a turning point in the story. For a long time you had watched quietly, collecting impressions and patterns that your spirit recognized, even when your mind struggled to explain them. Eventually, the unease inside you grew strong enough that silence no longer felt responsible. You began sharing your concerns carefully, not with accusations or hostility, but with the hope that someone else might look more closely at what you were seeing. You did not expect immediate agreement, yet you believed that if people simply examined the pattern with honesty, they might notice the same inconsistencies that had unsettled you. Instead, something very different happened. Rather than investigating the possibility that your perception might carry truth, many people instinctively redirected the conversation toward you. Your observations were reframed as emotional reactions rather than discernment. Some suggested that you were being overly sensitive, or that you were reading too much meaning into ordinary interactions. Others implied that your discomfort came from jealousy or insecurity, as though the only possible explanation for your concern was personal rivalry. In a matter of moments, the focus shifted away from the behavior you had noticed and toward the stability of the person raising the question. Chosen one. This response revealed something important about human nature. When a group becomes comfortable with a certain narrative, confronting the possibility that the narrative is false requires effort and courage. It is often easier for people to question the messenger than to reconsider what they have already accepted. If your perception was correct, it would require others to re-examine their trust, their judgments, and perhaps even their own role in overlooking warning signs. Challenging those assumptions can be uncomfortable, so the simplest path for many people is to dismiss the concern entirely. What made the experience especially painful was not only the reaction of distant acquaintances, but also the hesitation of people you trusted. Some of those closest to you listened politely, yet responded with gentle skepticism. They told you that the situation probably was not as serious as it seemed. or that you might be interpreting ordinary behavior as something intentional. Their words were not always harsh, but the message behind them suggested that your perception was unreliable. Hearing this from strangers might have been disappointing, yet hearing it from people whose understanding you valued carried a deeper wound. Chosen one, disbelief from trusted voices cuts differently than disagreement from the outside world. When people you care about question your perception, it can create a moment of intense self-examination. You begin asking yourself whether you have misunderstood the situation, whether your instincts are being shaped by fear rather than clarity. You replay conversations and events repeatedly, searching for evidence that you might have overlooked. This internal questioning is not weakness. It is the natural response of a thoughtful person who does not want to judge others unfairly. Yet even while you questioned yourself, the pattern that had troubled you did not disappear. The same behaviors continued appearing in subtle ways. The same echoes of your ideas resurfaced through the same voice. The same unsettling shift in energy appeared whenever that individual interacted with you directly. Each new occurrence strengthened the quiet conviction within you, even as the world around you treated your perception with doubt. Chosen one, this created a period of isolation that few people fully understand. Truth often places a person in a lonely position before it becomes visible to others. When you are the first to notice a problem, you do not yet have the confirmation that later events will provide. In that early stage, you must hold your awareness without the support of collective agreement. The absence of validation can make the burden feel heavier because you must trust what you perceive while watching others dismiss it. During this time, you faced a defining choice that shaped the path of the story. You could have retreated completely into silence, choosing comfort over honesty. Remaining quiet would have allowed relationships to continue without tension. No one would have questioned your motives or suggested that you were exaggerating the situation. Life might have appeared peaceful on the surface because the subject would simply disappear from conversation. Yet retreating into silence would also have required you to ignore what your spirit had already recognized. The awareness inside you did not come from suspicion or hostility. It came from discernment. Ignoring that discernment would have meant disconnecting from the inner voice that God had been strengthening within you. After long reflection, you realized that preserving that inner clarity mattered more than maintaining temporary comfort. Chosen one, choosing to remain faithful to what you sensed did not mean becoming confrontational or aggressive. You continued speaking carefully, offering your perspective without attacking anyone. Even when people disagreed, you tried to express your concerns with respect and patience. Your goal was not to win arguments, but to encourage awareness. You hoped that if others paid closer attention, they might recognize the same inconsistencies that had drawn your attention. Still, each attempt to communicate your concern often returned to the same pattern of dismissal. The conversation shifted away from the behavior you described and back toward questioning your motives or emotional state. Over time, this repeated cycle became exhausting because it placed you in the position of defending your perception rather than discussing the issue itself. The experience reinforced the feeling that truth sometimes requires endurance before it receives acknowledgement. Chosen one, beneath this struggle, another realization was slowly emerging. What you had sensed was not simply awkward social behavior or personality conflict. Your spirit had been detecting something deeper about the person whose actions troubled you. Beneath the imitation of ideas and the careful presentation of friendliness, there existed a noticeable absence of authenticity. Their interactions carried a quality that felt calculated rather than genuine. This awareness became clearer as you observed the way they adapted their behavior in different settings. Around certain people, they displayed warmth and agreement, presenting themselves as trustworthy and supportive. In other moments, their tone shifted subtly, revealing a different attitude that appeared only when fewer witnesses were present. The contrast between these versions of their behavior suggested that the friendliness people trusted might have been a carefully maintained performance. Chosen one, discernment often works through sensing what is missing as much as through noticing what is present. In this case, your spirit recognized an absence of empathy that did not align with the image the person projected publicly. While they spoke in ways that appeared caring, the emotional resonance behind those words felt empty. Conversations that should have carried mutual understanding instead felt like observations, as though the person was studying reactions rather than sharing genuine connection. This difference may have been invisible to many people, because performances built on charm can be very convincing. When someone consistently presents a pleasant demeanor, others rarely search for deeper motives. Your awareness, however, continued detecting the tension between appearance and authenticity. The same attentiveness that allowed you to recognize patterns in behavior also allowed you to sense when empathy was being imitated rather than felt. Chosen one, this deeper understanding intensified your concern because it suggested that the issue involved more than copied ideas. If a person lacked authentic empathy while carefully presenting themselves as trustworthy, the potential for harm extended beyond intellectual imitation. It meant that people around them might be offering trust and vulnerability to someone who viewed relationships strategically rather than compassionately. Because of this realization, you tried again to warn those closest to the situation. You spoke about the importance of being cautious with access and trust. Your intention was not to create fear, but to encourage awareness so that no one would place themselves in a position where manipulation could occur. You hoped that even if people disagreed with your interpretation, they might at least remain attentive to the possibility that the situation deserved closer examination. Yet once again, your warnings were minimized. Many people preferred the comfort of believing that everything was normal rather than confronting the idea that someone they trusted might be performing a role. Acknowledging your perspective would have required them to reconsider their own judgments, and that reconsideration felt unnecessary as long as nothing openly harmful had yet occurred. Chosen one, this became one of the central burdens of the story. You found yourself watching others choose the reassurance of familiar appearances while carrying the awareness that those appearances might not represent the full truth. Each time your concerns were dismissed, the isolation deepened. You were not alone physically, but spiritually you stood apart from the collective narrative that everyone else accepted. Holding that position required strength, because it meant continuing to trust the discernment God had placed within you, even when the world around you doubted it. Many people eventually abandon their perception under that kind of pressure, choosing agreement over conviction simply to restore harmony. Your journey, however, required a different response. The clarity you had been given was not meant to disappear under the weight of misunderstanding. Chosen one, the lonely season of warning and disbelief was therefore not a mistake in the story. It was part of the process that revealed the depth of your discernment. While others relied on appearances, you learned to trust the quiet signals that your spirit recognized before evidence became visible. The isolation that accompanied that awareness did not invalidate your perception. Instead, it prepared you for the moment when the truth you had carried privately would eventually become undeniable. Chosen one, the turning point in the story did not arrive through argument, persuasion, or dramatic confrontation. It came through something far more powerful and far more difficult for anyone to dismiss: reality itself. For a long time, the truth existed only as perception within your spirit. You had recognized patterns, sensed inconsistencies, and warned others that something beneath the surface was not what it appeared to be. Yet, until that moment arrived, your discernment remained something people could explain away, reinterpret, or ignore. They could call it overthinking, emotional reaction, or misunderstanding, because the evidence they demanded had not yet stepped into the open. But God has a way of allowing truth to surface in moments that no human explanation can neutralize. Eventually, the hidden structure that had been carefully maintained began to fracture under the weight of its own deception. Events started unfolding that could not be disguised as coincidence or minimized as rumor. The situation that had once appeared stable began collapsing through undeniable developments. What had been concealed behind charm and performance started appearing through actions that revealed the reality beneath the image. For some situations, the exposure arrives through public scandal. In others, it surfaces through legal consequences, financial revelations, betrayed confidences, or witnesses who finally speak with clarity. Sometimes the truth appears through a chain of events so precise and undeniable that no one can continue pretending the original image was real. However it happened in this story, the result was the same. The carefully maintained illusion could no longer survive contact with reality. Chosen one. The moment the truth surfaced created a shockwave through the same circles that had once doubted you. People who had defended the person so confidently suddenly found themselves confronted with information that contradicted everything they had believed. The person they had trusted now stood exposed in ways that no explanation could repair. Actions that had once seemed harmless were now seen in a completely different light, revealing intentions that had been hidden behind carefully chosen words. For many of them, the most unsettling realization was not only that the deception had existed, but that someone had already warned them. The memory of your voice, your careful concerns, and your earlier observations returned with painful clarity. Words that had once sounded suspicious or exaggerated suddenly made sense. The same patterns you had described began appearing clearly within the evidence now unfolding before them. Chosen one. In those moments, people were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about themselves. They had not merely been deceived by someone skilled at maintaining appearances. They had also participated in dismissing the one person who had recognized the danger early. Their doubt had not only protected the deception, it had also isolated the person who had been trying to warn them. Realizing this created a quiet weight of guilt that many struggled to carry. Family members, friends, and community voices who once questioned your perception now had to revisit the conversations they had shared with you. They remembered the moments when you had expressed concern and the responses they had given. Some recalled advising you to let the situation go. Others remembered suggesting that your intuition might be wrong. Each memory now returned with a different meaning because the evidence in front of them confirmed what they had once dismissed. Chosen one. This kind of realization can be deeply uncomfortable for those who experience it. Admitting that someone else saw the truth before you requires humility. Admitting that you silenced or doubted that person requires even greater honesty. For some people, this realization leads to sincere regret and a desire to restore trust. For others, it produces quiet avoidance because facing the mistake feels too difficult. Either way, the truth has already spoken, and the reality of what happened cannot be erased. It is important to understand that this exposure was not a form of revenge orchestrated by human anger. You did not create the circumstances that brought the truth into the open, and you did not need to pursue anyone in order to force accountability. What occurred was something far more significant: divine vindication. God allowed reality itself to reveal what arguments could not prove. In doing so, He removed every possibility of dismissing the truth as personal conflict or emotional reaction. Chosen one. Divine vindication often works this way. It does not rely on loud defense or endless attempts to convince others. Instead, it allows time and reality to work together until the truth becomes visible in ways that no narrative can conceal. When that moment arrives, the evidence stands on its own. No explanation can reduce it, and no accusation can redirect it. What was hidden becomes undeniable simply because it is now impossible to ignore. As the exposure unfolded, something else began changing within you. At first, the revelation brought a mixture of emotions. There was relief that the truth had finally surfaced, but there was also the memory of the loneliness you had endured while carrying that awareness alone. You remembered the times when your concerns had been dismissed, and the moments when you wondered whether trusting your discernment had been a mistake. Yet gradually, a deeper realization replaced those memories. The greatest gift from this entire trial was not simply being proven right. The greatest gift was the clarity it brought to your understanding of the voice within you. For years, you had relied on discernment without public confirmation. Now the unfolding of events had demonstrated that the perception guiding you was not fear or imagination. It was spiritual awareness shaped by God. Chosen one, this realization changed the way you understood yourself. The discernment that once felt like a burden now revealed itself as a form of protection. What had isolated you earlier now became a source of strength, because it confirmed that the sensitivity you carried had purpose. Your ability to recognize patterns, sense hidden motives, and perceive shifts in energy was not something to suppress. It was a gift meant to guard both you and others from harm. Because of this experience, you no longer need permission from anyone to trust what you sense. The trial has already demonstrated that spiritual accuracy often appears before social agreement. Many people recognize truth only after evidence becomes visible. Discernment, however, allows someone to recognize that truth much earlier. Your journey taught you that early awareness may not always be welcomed, but it remains valuable even when it stands alone. Chosen one, another change emerged through this process. Your voice began carrying a different kind of authority. This authority did not come from demanding validation or insisting that others acknowledge your insight. It came from the quiet confirmation that truth had validated you on its own. The events that unfolded spoke more clearly than any argument you could have made. In that sense, your credibility was restored not by effort, but by reality itself. People who once doubted you began listening differently when you spoke. Some approached you with humility, asking how you had recognized the situation so early. Others simply watched with new respect, understanding that your perception carried weight they had previously underestimated. Your words now carried influence, not because you fought to be heard, but because time had revealed the accuracy of your discernment. Chosen one, this shift also clarified your purpose moving forward. The experience you endured was never meant to end with personal vindication alone. It prepared you for a role that extends beyond your own story. Many people will face moments when they sense something is wrong before anyone else recognizes it. In those moments, they will feel the same isolation you once felt. They will question their perception and wonder whether trusting it will cost them relationships or belonging. Your journey equips you to guide those people when they reach that lonely crossroads. You understand what it feels like to stand with truth while the world doubts you. You understand the patience required to wait for reality to confirm what discernment already revealed. Because you have walked through that trial yourself, your words can encourage others not to abandon the clarity God has given them, simply because it is not yet popular. Chosen one. This is how the story moves from survival into purpose. The exposure that vindicated you also strengthened your identity and clarified your assignment. You no longer see discernment as a strange burden that separates you from others. Instead, you recognize it as a responsibility. Your ability to see clearly carries the potential to protect people who might otherwise ignore warning signs until it is too late. The trial therefore ends not only with the collapse of deception, but with the rise of deeper authority within you. The voice you once doubted has proven itself trustworthy. The awareness you once carried alone now stands confirmed by reality. And the purpose emerging from that experience will continue shaping how you move forward, guiding others who will one day face the same difficult choice between comfortable silence and courageous truth. Chosen one, the conclusion of this story brings a quiet but powerful realization into your spirit. The long season of confusion, doubt, and misunderstanding has finally revealed its true meaning. You now see clearly that you were never unstable, never imagining danger where none existed, and never reacting from insecurity the way others suggested. What you carried was discernment. God allowed you to see what others were not ready to recognize, to feel shifts in truth that the crowd preferred to ignore, and to remain anchored in clarity while many around you chose the comfort of appearances. For a time, that awareness felt like humiliation. Being doubted, dismissed, or labeled as overly suspicious created moments where you wondered if trusting your instincts had cost you too much. There were days when the loneliness felt heavier than the certainty you carried. Yet the exposure that eventually unfolded has reframed every one of those moments. What once looked like isolation was actually preparation. God was teaching you how to trust spiritual sight over public opinion, divine warnings over human reassurance, and the quiet voice within you over the louder noise of collective denial. Chosen one, the revelation of the false person did more than simply correct the story others believed about you. It established something deeper and far more important. It confirmed that the sensitivity you once questioned is sacred. The instincts you carried were not flaws that needed to be silenced. They were signals meant to protect you and those around you. The warnings that people once minimized were not overreactions, but glimpses of truth appearing earlier than most people were willing to accept. Because of that, you now move forward differently. The trial has strengthened your trust in the way God speaks to you through perception, intuition, and spiritual awareness. You no longer feel the need to dilute what you sense just to preserve harmony in rooms that prefer illusion. You have learned that protecting peace sometimes requires standing apart from the crowd until reality reveals what discernment already recognized. Chosen one, the greatest transformation is the confidence that now lives inside you. You are no longer asking whether your inner voice can be trusted. The story itself has answered that question. God has shown you that the clarity He places in your spirit does not need immediate approval to be real. Time, truth, and reality will always confirm what comes from Him. And as you step into the next season of your life, you do so not with hesitation, but with a deeper certainty. The sight God has given you is part of your calling, and you will never again betray that gift simply to make others comfortable.